Thank you so much for your time and for being here again with us. This is Erin Luigi. She's going to talk to us about engineering women's health. And before we get back into it, could you remind us what department you're in and what lab you're in?
I'm Erin Luwaji, and I'm in the Mechanical Engineering Department at Columbia. I'm in the Myers Soft Tissue Lab, and we focus on studying the mechanics of preterm birth.
Thank you so much. I'll let you take it away. I will keep an eye on the chat. If anyone has any questions, please drop them in and I'll do the interrupting for you. Don't hesitate to ask any questions.
Love to get questions during these, so please ask away. Cool, so I just told you this information, but yeah, I'm a PhD student here, and I specifically work on developing computational tools to help understand the biomechanics of preterm birth. So before I really dive into engineering and women's health and how engineers are helping to close the medical knowledge gap, and then also just like help doctors provide better care for their patients, we will go over the female anatomy quickly because this is gonna be brought up a lot in my talk. So the first thing I'd like to point out is the ovaries, which are right here and here. And these are, this is an organ that produces and releases eggs, but also makes the hormones that help regulate the female body. Next to the ovaries are the fallopian tubes, and these help the egg pass from the ovary to the uterus. And then the uterus itself is a very cool organ that during pregnancy, it's where the baby grows or the fertilized egg will implant. But if not, then women menstruate and have their periods, and that is the uterus shedding its lining. The cervix is also known as the mouth of the uterus, and it's another very cool organ that kind of connects the uterus to the vagina, and it has lots of cool ways to prevent bacterial infection and also serves a really important role in pregnancy and keeping the baby in there and then also facilitating its exit out. And then lastly, there's the vagina, which connects the uterus to the outside world. So when I'm talking about women's health, there's like women-specific health issues and conditions that I just want to like go over. And this is what the National Institute of Health kind of defines as the women's health areas. So there's gynecological health and disorders such as menstruation and pelvic floor disorders, pregnancy issues like prenatal care, preterm birth, which I work on, and postnatal care. There's also disorders related to infertility like endometriosis, then other just like general disorders and conditions like uterine and cervical cancers, and you can also put like mental health in this category. And then issues related to women's overall health and wellness, so like violence against women, osteoporosis, and menopause. So another question that we need to ask ourselves is, what do engineers do? So growing up, I was told that engineers solve problems, which is true. But lots of people solve problems, and we're very grateful to them for doing that. So what engineers specifically do is apply the principles of science and math to develop practical and also repeatable solutions to problems. And lastly, before I dive into how engineers are working in women's health, I'll just go over like, why is there, this gap in medical care? So the first thing to know is just protectionist policies. This would be the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki, which are two kind of agreements on what is ethical to do in human subject research. And then also thalidomide, which was a drug that was given to expectant moms for morning sickness, but ended up causing a lot of birth defects. So because of thalidomide, the FDA ended up restricting women from participating in early clinical trials in the late 1970s. And so there's like a whole large amount of time where people were kind of dissuaded from researching women's health. So finally, in the early 1990s, the NIH set aside a lot of funding to start looking more into women's health. And then also for a long time, there's just been this assumption that health and disease are the same in men and women, but this is not the case. So let's get into our engineering in women's health. A couple of examples of this. So the first problem that engineers can help with in women's health is detecting pregnancy. So the science behind this is that scientists have known for a very long time that there's something in pregnant women's urine that can help them detect pregnancy. And this they found out in about the 1960s was it's called HCG, which stands for human chorionic gonadotropin, which is a hormone that's produced in the earliest stages of pregnancy that tells the body not to menstruate and then also supports the formation of the placenta. So before they knew about of efficient ways to test for HCG, women would have to go to the doctor's office and they'd take their women and inject their urine into animals like frogs. And this was how, if the frog laid eggs, then they knew that she was pregnant. But this was not done commonly. So a lot of the time before the 1970s, you just kind of wait to see if you gained weight or had morning sickness. So once they were able to kind of develop these more helpful and more repeatable tools to help detect HCG, and these are called antibodies, which are molecules that can kind of like recognize other chemicals or molecules. So they were able to make this into an early at-home pregnancy test, but they were really hard to do. They had 10 steps and it took like 2.5 hours. So what engineers helped make are the pee on the stick pregnancy tests that we all know about. So this kind of technology is called a lateral flow assay, and it's used to detect a lot of things besides pregnancy. So if you get tested for flu or strep throat or even rapid COVID tests, it uses this same kind of technology. So the first part is the sample pad, and then it goes into the conjugate pad where there's the antibodies, which have like some sort of dye or a nanoparticle on them, then this membrane, and then a test line and a control line, and then a final wicking pad. So in the case of the pee on a stick pregnancy test, your analyte is the urine, which goes onto the sample pad. If there's HCG in the urine, it will attach to the antibodies, and then it'll be whipped down the membrane. So HCG at the test line will be sandwiched between the antibody that it was attached to in the conjugate pad and then another row of antibodies at the test line. And then like any good scientific test, there'll also be a way to control our experiment. So if there's no HCG, but there'll also be like extra of the antibodies with the dye or nanoparticle in the conjugate pad, and these will attach at the control line. And hence, this is why if you're pregnant, you'll see 2 lines on these pee on a stick pregnancy tests, and if you're not pregnant, just 1, because that's the control line. Like that. So if you're interested in learning more about pregnancy tests, there's some really good YouTube videos out there from TED Talks, and then a really good history on it you can find here. So the next problem I want to talk about is cervical cancer. So cervical cancer causes around 270,000 deaths annually, but it's considered a very treatable cancer. So why are so many people dying of cervical cancer? So there's a theory that it's that women don't want to go in to get screened for cervical cancer. And this is because in cervical cancer screening, they use a device called a speculum. And these are used to examine the cervix and are placed in the vaginal canal. And then the doctor can screen for cervical cancer, but also check for infection and also dilation of the cervix in pregnancy. So the design of the speculum hasn't really changed in 150 years. And a lot of patients during speculum exams say that it makes them feel anxious or uncomfortable and it causes them pain and embarrassment. So they end up not going in to get checked for cervical cancer. So a group at Duke University under Dr. Nirmala Ramanujan has come up with this really cool device called the caloscope. So the caloscope has this slim tubular body and then a calla lily shaped introducer at the end. And inside of this is a camera. And the camera allows the doctor to look at the cervix in real time without using a speculum. So of the patients who tried the caloscope after they had a speculum exam before, 100% of them said that they preferred the caloscope to have their cervix examined. So it's a tool that doctors can use, but also it's very transportable. It has an app associated with it. So it's also it's possible for patients to use it on their own. And also it could be used in countries where doctors' offices are a lot farther apart. So as an engineer, I really, really love it when I see design that's inspired by nature. So what's very cool is the calla lily shaped introducer. At least to me, this is what I really geek out about. So when they were designing the caloscope, they had started with this flat tip inserter shape. And what they found was that when they were trying to look at women's cervices, they couldn't always manipulate the cervix to be able to get it dead on facing the camera. So what they did was they added this little lip to it. So then if the cervix is like facing left or right or up and down, they have a little bit of leverage on it to be able to turn it and make so that it sits correctly within the device. So I think this is a really, really cool solution to this problem. And you can find out more about this device at these websites. So another problem is clinical studies for prescription drugs and medications. So our kind of science behind this here is the hormone cycle. So like I said before, until the 1990s, women weren't able to participate in clinical trials, but even still, many clinical trials exclude women because the hormone cycles are considered a confounding variable. But this still isn't good, because when we're excluding women from studies, it makes them more likely to experience side effects from the medications that are not being tested on them. So they're 50 to 75% more likely to experience side effects. And it's known that a lot of medications do act differently in men than women, like painkillers and anxiety medications. Oh, and also hormones are, like I said earlier, the chemical messengers that help the body function. So what a group from Teresa Woodward's lab at Northwestern University has come up with is another really rad device called Evatar. So Evatar is a microfluidic device. And just to give a little background, microfluidic devices are very small devices that kind of leverage small fluid flows. So they're small, so they're easy to transport, and you can also test a lot of things on one device. So what this group did was they made essentially a small female human reproductive system. So they have the fallopian tubes, the uterus, cervix, ovaries, and then also a liver. And I know that the liver is not a part of the female reproductive system, but it was really important for them to include the liver because it's a very important organ that plays a role in breaking down medicine. So within this device, they have the ovary, and it's then connected to the fallopian tube, to the uterus, to the cervix, and then the liver. And they're all in their own little wells, and these are populated with real human tissues. So they have living cells in here that they can test medications on, and it'll flow through the system. And it also is able to go through the female hormone cycle. And it's a 28-day cycle that they were able to replicate. So the scientists can measure how the other organ modules respond to the hormones that are being produced by the system itself, but also test how drugs change the hormone levels in the system and how the rest of the organs react. So in the future, they'd really like to connect it to other organs in the body, like a heart or lungs, to study more of how those also would respond to new drugs. So if you want to learn more about this device, you can go to the lab website. They have a really nice kind of summary of it. And then Nature is where they published this particular research. So another problem in women's health is maternal mortality. So maternal mortality is a rather sad topic. It's when moms, new moms die like within a year of childbirth. And the United States has really the worst rate of maternal health in the developed world. So our little graph on the right shows us how we're just kind of skyrocketing away from everyone else. And the other really sad thing is that this rate is significantly higher among African American mothers. So a thought as to why this is because our health system is fragmented. The mom and the baby will each have their own doctor, so their obstetrician or gynecologist, and then the baby has a pediatrician, but they'll also be like mental health workers or doulas or other birth workers, and they might not all be coordinated. And then also patients tend to not be given enough information on how to tell if they need medical attention after giving birth. And a lot of it's focused on the care of the baby. So a company founded in 2014 by, her name is Melissa Hanna. It's called Mommy. And this is an app that is designed to be an all-in-one care coordination platform that tracks the health of the mom and her baby. So because it's a company, there's not a lot of under the hood stuff that's out there, but I will tell you what I really like about this technology. And it's, first of all, that it's a secure platform. So they've worked with the right governmental bodies to make sure that the patient information stays safe. It connects the mother with their care team and the care team with each other. So it gives them really the best care scenario possible. It also has care managers within the app that will give them personalized support. It has built-in tools to flag moms who are at high risk and then tells their doctor that they're at high risk. It also, in our virtual time, supports virtual appointments. So it's another one of those things where in areas where it might be harder for a mom to get to her care provider, she's able to see them right away. So something that was really cool as a secondary outcome of this app is that it's really good at screening new moms for postpartum depression and then alerting their care team. And this is something that is also a really large problem aside from maternal mortality. So here are some of the company's kind of stats on where this app has gotten to. My really favorite stat here is that they have the 73% same day response rate to the new moms. So they're not waiting a long time to hear from their care team. And then also that so many of them are doing the mood disorder screenings, which would help flag for postpartum depression. So again, if you're interested in learning more about this technology, you can visit their website. I also really love listening to the interviews with the Mommy CEO, Melissa Hanna, which you can find a couple of them here. So finally, the last problem that I'll talk about is preterm birth, which, as you know from earlier in this presentation, is what I work on. So the science that we know about preterm birth is that the cervix is really, really important in helping keeping the baby in there for the whole amount of time that it's kind of like cooking. So preterm birth is when a baby is born too early, so before 37 weeks of pregnancy. A term pregnancy is considered 40 weeks. So about 10% of babies in the US are born preterm, and this is also consistent with worldwide levels of preterm birth. But the really hard thing is there's really no reliable way to predict preterm birth for moms. But it's known that cervical length is important. So it's a common way to assess risk, but still it's for new moms, it's about a 50-50 on whether this risk assessment will actually be correct. So we know that the cervix plays an important role. We just don't exactly know how to tell if a baby will be born preterm.
Erin,
So
when
yeah,
you say cervix length, is it like more higher risk if the cervix is smaller or like has less strength to it, I suppose? Is that
yeah. So we talk a lot about the structural stiffness, I guess, of the cervix. So in our lab, we think that it's not just the cervical length that is important, but also the diameter of the cervix, and again, how stiff the cervix is.
okay?
So we do a lot of, other people in my lab test actual like human tissue. So we have human cervical tissue and even uterine tissue to try to figure out what is going on in the cervix itself. But
Actually take like samples from a person and test like the tensile strength
yeah,
or what?
yep.
Okay.
So this is like a very it's a very cool area because mechanical engineers for a long time were known for pulling metals apart and figuring out, oh, what does it take to break metal? And we have a mechanical engineering lab that's doing essentially the same thing, but for human tissue.
That's really
So
cool. Yeah.
it's pretty cool. I don't do that. What I work on is developing ways that we can take those properties that we learn from testing cervical tissue and incorporating them into patient-specific models that could then be used to assess an individual mom's risk of preterm birth. So the big engineering challenge here is how do we build a patient-specific model of the uterus and cervix? In a lot of other kind of patient-specific modeling fields, they like to use, the technical term is high fidelity models, which essentially means just very detailed models where we're capturing every little thing. But the problem is MRI is really, really uncommon in pregnancy. And also MRIs are really uncomfortable to go through, especially when you're growing a baby. So what we came up with is this way to take some overall dimensions of the uterus and cervix from ultrasound and build it into low fidelity models where we're just incorporating some intrauterine diameters. So like how just long is it and wide is it? And we take the uterine wall thickness at several points and build it in, and measures of the cervix, including the cervical length, but also the diameter. And I've come up with a process that will automatically take those measurements and turn it into a patient-specific model of the uterus and cervix from the ultrasound itself. So we can do this for any mom at any stage in her pregnancy and build a model quickly of her. So what we're rolling this into now is incorporating our patient-specific stiffness of the cervix. So there's this, I was really tempted to talk about this company, but I didn't. It's a company in Switzerland called Pragnolia, and they make a device that will grab the end of the cervix by pulling on it lightly with, it's like a little vacuum almost, that will pull the cervix in and tell us how much pressure it takes to deform the cervix. So it's really interesting. I've had some doctors explain it to me this way, so I will explain it to you this way, that at the beginning of pregnancy, if you touch the tip of your nose, that's about how firm the cervix is. And by the end of pregnancy, if you relax your lips, that's how soft the cervix is. So what this tool does for us is it gives us a number on like, well, how actually stiff is this cervix? Is it closer to this or closer to this? So for moms who are delivering preterm, we think that their cervix is turning to like a lip squishiness too early. So what we do is we take that number and we incorporate it into these models that I was talking about earlier of their uterus and cervix. And then we can track how the uterus and cervix are being deformed throughout pregnancy. So this is my work, and obviously I'm still working on it, but it's a very exciting field to be in. And we're doing a lot of stuff on looking at women who are at high risk for preterm birth, so they have those short cervices, and then our low risk patients who have longer, stiffer cervices, and trying to tease out what exactly is different and how much is the cervix being stretched in both of those scenarios. So,
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
So of those like 3 different layers in the figure,
Yes.
based off of the colors, would you guess like the third row is most susceptible to preterm if it's got a lower score, if it's like softer, or is that
Yes.
backwards?
Sorry, I did not explain this figure at all to you. I apologize. So this is one patient throughout her entire pregnancy. She did deliver at term. So what we're trying to do here is look at how much the uterus and cervix are deformed in a normal pregnancy. So strain is a word that's used a lot in mechanical engineering that essentially just means like how much is something changing in length. So the way that strain is calculated is we look at the change in length of something and divide it by the length that it was before. So that's just what these maps are telling you, is that as we progress in pregnancy, there's a lot more baby and fluid in there. So the red kind of tells you like, oh, that is getting really squishy. So we're still working on this. But if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing, you can visit our lab website. And then the paper that I recently published on how we build these models is also available. So with that, I'd like to thank you all and take any other questions that you may have. Thank you.
So much. I want to mention, so I have a friend at the med campus who does gynecological exams, and I showed her the caloscope, and she said she would like show it to the medical director. So
oh, that's amazing. That's so cool.
Columbia, yeah. So we'll see.
Hopefully, I know. I'm like, oh, I hope they adopt this rather quickly into standard of care.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a logical transition.
I agree.
Seems like the best inventions just make so much sense. They're just so simple. Yeah.
I know. It's a really great device. Yeah.
Yeah, I told two of my friends who are planning to get pregnant soon, I told them about the caloscope too, and now she's like, she brought it up to her OBGYN, and she's like, I want to use this.
Absolutely. It's great. It's so cool. Yeah. Oh, I love it. I'm so glad that you guys told people about the caloscope. It's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, could I ask, I guess so if you develop these, you're developing these great models to have a predictor to basically tell a patient what risk they have of preterm birth. Is there anything you can do like at that point? Like what would they do in preparation as the patient?
Right. So this is also rather heartbreaking, which is right now, in terms of being able to prevent preterm birth, there's not a lot of good options. So what we're hoping we can do with the models eventually is simulate if we put in the kinds of devices or the kinds of interventions and see which would work best for that mom. But yeah, right now it's the ways that they try to prevent preterm birth is called, there's a couple of them. One is called a pessary, which is like a little silicone shaped donut that gets placed over the cervix. That is not fun to have put on your cervix. It's very painful. Another one, anyone who is considered high risk gets put on progesterone, which is a hormone that is thought to help the cervix, but no one understands how progesterone works in making the cervix less squishy. So that's something we'd also like to understand more. And then in really bad cases, they get a cerclage, which is where they surgically sew the cervix shut. And those are really awful because they do help in a lot of women in like keeping the baby in there. But if your baby is going to be born early, sometimes the cerclage will rip your cervical tissue. And so it's a messy situation. And also some doctors have their own cerclage way that they like to do. So in emergency, a different doctor might not know how to get that cerclage out. So it's,
Gotcha. More work to do.
yes.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat from Camille. How long do you think it will take for some of these things to become mainstream?
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, it's, the answer is I really don't know. For things like the pregnancy test, obviously that is mainstream, and I don't know how long it took between when that was on the market to when it was kind of like everyone's go-to. So that's a very good question. For things like the caloscope, that one, they have a lot of really good data on that. It is as good as speculum exams in helping screen for cervical cancer. But at that point, it's like, are doctors willing to use this device over the speculum, which they were trained on and know how to use? So there's the part about making sure that on the engineer side, that it is safe for patients to use and effective and reliable. But then there's also the doctor side where we need to make sure that the doctors want to use these devices. So that's probably one of the hardest things about being in this area is engineers, you have almost like two end users that you're trying to balance the needs of. Yeah, really good question.
I have a quick question, Erin.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering, do you know, like, does your lab or have you thought about coupling your modeling of the cervix with other, variables? Like, do you keep track maybe of a mother's diet? So does diet influence a preterm birth, or are there basically environmental factors that could influence a preterm birth happening? And could you, if you added that to your model, could you better predict?
That is a question we ask ourselves all the time. So are a lot of things that are considered risk factors for preterm birth. So something that we are starting with is looking at just what we know best, which are the mechanics of what's going on. So we're hoping that that is enough by just like objectively looking at the cervix in helping us predict preterm birth. But you are correct, and the body is a very complex system. So when we exclude variables, it's always a big question mark on what are we missing. Yeah, we have a study that we're proposing where we're like, oh, we really just want to look at these mechanical variables, and it's really tempting to be like, oh, let's like see if we can pull all this other data on the moms, but it's it's hard.
There's a lot.
But really good question.
I
guess actually oh yeah, go ahead, Ariana.
Sorry. Well, off that question, I mean, you probably don't have an answer because I have no idea how you would know, but like, that made me think, like, what if age is also a factor in terms of just like your tissue strength?
Yeah. Age is, yes. So for our studies, we don't recruit patients who are over 40 because that's also considered a risk factor for preterm birth. So yeah, there's like age, race, if you've had any sort of surgery on your cervix are all things. that can be considered risk factors for this. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Sergio. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I don't know. I guess like I was listening to Erin say like like I guess you think along the lines very mechanically. So I'm wondering too, like, could you like have you guys like thought of maybe looking at, I don't know, like does exercise maybe influence the mechanical, I don't know, dynamics, I guess, of the cervix or somehow, like.
That's a really good question. So one of the doctors that we collaborate with, her theory is that there is some sort of muscle activity in the cervix that will like keep it shut rather than it just being passive, like I'm this strength right now. So we don't really know. It's nearly impossible to do in vivo tests in this field, or tests that are on real people. So it's yeah, there's a lot of things that are like, that's a nice theory that we have. What if we try it on our models and see what happens? But yeah, there's the question. These are all really good questions, and a lot of my work is being like, oh, it is so disappointing that we don't know that yet, because it makes it really hard. Yeah, I'm loving this question. This is great. Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions from the chat? Do you mind if I share your slides afterwards with everyone?
Greatly. I don't think so. I will double check to make sure that I've gotten everything correct in there. But yeah, that's fine.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us again. And I hope we see you at the next event as well. And thank you so much, Erin, for your time and for coming back again.
All right. Well,
thank you, Erin.
That's great.
This is so cool. And congrats on your paper.
Yeah.
All right. Well, have a great Saturday, everyone. It's so great to see everyone. And hope you have a good weekend.